I treated the boys and how I poured into them. And so one of the things I started with them was I told them in the door, I'm like, look, I know I'm not your dad, right? And I'm not here to replace your dad. So that door for your father, it will always be open. But I will stand in the gap until he shows up, you know.
Mhm.
And so I said, I need you guys to know two things from here and on out, no matter what, just remember these two things. And remember, I love you and I
Yeah.
always have your best interest at heart. And so if you can remember those two things, because I knew the day was going to come when, they get teenagers and you're not my dad and all that
Yep.
stuff. I know all of that is coming.
Right.
But if we remember, let's start now and we're pouring into these two things. And then no matter what, all the other things that comes down the line, even in the midst of those things, you will know that I love you and I have your best interest at heart. Even when you don't like me, even when you don't agree with me, even when, things don't look like how you may want it to look, you
Right.
will know that I love you and I have your best interest at heart. And I always laugh now. One of the things that I always say is my one son who gave me the hardest time, who gave me the hardest time as a young man is the one that says I love you the most. Is amazing to watch them now.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Lived Experiences podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Tamea Ryan, and today I'm so excited. I am joined by Ernest James, founder of DealHealFulfill.org. Ernest is a mentor, a speaker, and an advocate who has dedicated his life to inspiring and uplifting others through a powerful message of hope and healing. Ernest's personal philosophy is rooted in a profound truth. If you must fail, fail fast and fail first. That way you can rebound and rebuild your life, then help others do the same. What makes Ernest's work so vital is his commitment to healing what he calls the father wound. Being raised in a two-parent household, he recognized the devastating effects of fatherlessness on extended family and friends who were being raised by single mothers. Through his Friend to Fatherless Daughters campaign, Ernest helps fatherless mothers and daughters heal from their father's wound, and also through his Man Up, Man Activating Newly Untapped Potential Male Mentoring Program, he guides dads and sons towards healing and purpose. So thank you so much, Ernest, for taking time out of your busy schedule to be here to speak to my audience. I can't wait to get into your message, your purpose, and all the great work that you're doing.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Definitely has been a podcaster as well. I always love being on this side of the mic because I ain't got to do nothing but talk, and I can do that very well. So,
Yes,
so
sit
thank
back,
you for
relax.
having me.
Of course. Sit back, relax. We're going to have a great conversation and so excited to hear about all the work that you're doing in your community. And so let's just kind of start from the beginning. You were raised in a two-parent household, but you speak a lot about how you witnessed the impact of fatherlessness around you. Can you talk about and share what you observed growing up that made you recognize this as a problem within the community and an issue that needed to be addressed?
Yeah, to be honest, I don't even know what made me recognize it. Outside I just have to say it was just God just putting something in my spirit at a young age. Because I was raised in a two-parent household, come from two parents who was raised in two parents households. And so that was our norm. However, growing up and being in church and then just having other family members who fathers wasn't as active as they should be, for whatever reason, I just noticed that just at a young age. And I also knew how my dad was, raising us. I got 8 siblings, so it's 9 of us. And so my dad and my mom and knowing the part that my dad played in my life. I don't know how, like I said, I don't know what made me recognize it at the young age that I did, but I just did. And just even then, just having a thing in my spirit, like I want to be a mentor. And I don't even think I had that language at that time,
Mhm.
but I knew I wanted to be someone who was influential and active in the lives of other young men at that time, and young boys. The fatherless daughter phase didn't come to years later, which that was just out of nowhere, sort of. But just growing up with my friends and recognizing that, some of them didn't have their dads and everything. And I'll share this story sometime. When I was by the time became a teenager, we have friends that we grew up with, whether they were our church friends or some of our friends that, around the neighborhood that was always around. Right. And so my dad was a mechanic. And so he did what he did and he didn't care. So he have his oily clothes on or whatever, his hands is black and he just do what he do. He didn't
Right.
care. Um, and so, growing up in Chicago, and I know probably this is some other neighborhoods as well, you do what they call shoot the dozens, you know what I mean? And so you're
Mhm.
cracking jokes on each other and not too much is off limits, and so this one day is my brother and one of our other friends that they're like cracking jokes on each other or whatever. So my friend goes on this tangent, right? Talking about my dad. And he's joking about my dad. He's just going like back to back, and my brother's not saying anything. And so he's going for a while, cracking all these jokes about my dad. And then when he finishes, my brother just looks at him really seriously and said, "You know what? It's funny that you can tell me everything about my dad, but I can't tell you anything about yours." And, as a teenager then we're like, "Oh," you know what I mean? Like we
Right.
try to shut him down. But I never forgot that. I never
Mm,
forget I had already had, like I said, the mindset of becoming a mentor and having that being a part of who I want to be when I grew up. But then that moment just kinda almost crystallized it in my mind because this was my friend. And even though in this moment we were, joking or whatever, outside of the moment, like, that's a serious thing, like, we did not know his father. We've known each other our whole lives,
right.
we never met his father, and years later, his father would pass away, and I think, even maybe at the services, probably was the first time he had seen his father. You know what I'm
Wow.
saying? And so just taking that, again, I don't know why, or I'm not gonna say I don't know why, because I do believe I know why, because God had it in the plans for me to,
Mhm.
work in this area, but I don't know how at such a young age that I even paid attention to that. But I
Right.
did, and I think it was just a God given gift to be like, all right, you see this, pay attention to it because it's gonna come back up in the
Yeah.
future.
It was building in you at a young age, and
Yeah,
once you had the ability to really put it forward, you've done such great things, and we're gonna talk about, the Man Up program here in a moment, but I wanna take a step back and talk a little bit about the Friends of Fatherless Daughters campaign, because
mhm,
we do hear a lot about mentorship for young boys, especially young Black boys that are growing up in single-parent households. What made you expand your vision to also focusing on young girls as well?
yeah. So that came years later, right? So I've
Okay.
been I've been married and divorced, unfortunately, twice, right?
Okay.
But coming out of my second divorce, I really was kind of like, all right, I come from a two-parent household, and I
Uh-huh.
had this idea of what I wanted my life to be like when it came to marriage. Watching my mom and dad go through the ups and downs of life and still stay together. And
Uh-huh.
that's what I wanted. And so my first divorce really took me hard. Right. I was really like devastated with that because it was like to me almost it's like I was kind of letting myself down, but also kind of in maybe a crazy kind of way, maybe even letting my parents down because
Uh-huh.
divorce wasn't the example that I saw. You know what I mean?
Right.
And we had some hard times, and we can definitely get into that too, of what I learned from my parents about the marriage vows. So we can get into that. But if that wasn't divorce, wasn't my experience. It wasn't what I was shown.
Mhm.
And so I took that first divorce really hard. The second one, not as hard, but it still was like, all right, now it's the second time around, and so I
Right.
had to take ownership of my part in it. And so as I began to think, kind of dissect, my two marriages and what was my part and different things. One of the things that I realized was every woman I've ever dated was a fatherless daughter.
Mm,
From my first girlfriend all throughout, my adult life. And I'm just like, man, I never knew that. I never paid attention to it. Like it never was something that was on my mind. But once I once it came to my attention, me being the person that I am, was like, all right, how can I help this demographic of women that I keep coming in contact with?
mhm.
For whatever reason. They're attracted to me, I'm attracted to them, whatever. We keep connecting.
Right.
So what can I do to help this demographic of women? And so I started a page on Instagram called Friend to Fatherless Daughters. And so I just went on there and I've just given my advice as a friend, number one, as a girl dad myself. My daughter is my only biological child. She is 23 now.
Okay.
Um, and, just my experience of watching my dad raise my sisters. I got five sisters, and
Mhm.
that relationship, just taking all of that, in consideration and saying, well, what things do I know and what things have I learned as I started doing research at that time and reading books and things of that nature of the effects of fatherlessness on fatherless daughters. And so that
Mhm.
was kind of the beginning of even what I do now because I started doing that. I started doing like lives and just making posts on that Instagram page, and one day, a young lady reached out to me and she was like, would you like to be a guest on my podcast? And now this was
Mhm.
years ago. And I'm like, I had never
Right.
done a podcast. I heard of them. You know what I mean? I had
Mhm.
never done one. I haven't listened to one or watched one or anything. But I was like, all right. And
Yeah.
so I did it. And that was the very first podcast that I ever was on. But after I did that podcast, I got contacted with like seven more podcasts. And so I was
Wow.
like, all right. And so I did all of those podcasts. And one of those podcasts in particular was a podcast called Dads on Purpose,
Okay.
which was hosted by these two young men who were both girl dads too, as well. But they were also active in mentorship with young boys and stuff. And so they
Okay.
brought me on, and I did their podcast. And sometime later, I'm in Chicago, in the Chicagoland
Yes.
area, and they're out of Texas. And so I ended
Okay.
up going to Texas. And so while I was there, I reached out to, one of the gentlemen was like, hey, I'm in town. Let's do lunch. And so we met for lunch and, just over the conversation, he was like, I think you should have your own podcast. And so I said,
Mhm.
well, I'll think about it. And fast forward now, 240 some episodes later, we
Wow.
still been rocking at it. So, but that fatherless daughter, that recognition of the fact that I was connected to fatherless daughters, again, that
Mhm.
started everything that I do now. That
Right.
kind of got the ball rolling. And yeah, so it came from that, from my divorce and really just looking back on my dating history, and it was like
Mhm.
it was surprising to me. Like, man, I never noticed that. You know what I
Right.
mean? It never was a thing where like I was like purposely looking. It just
Mhm.
what I attracted, and I think even to this day I still attract either fatherless daughters or daughters with complicated relationships with
Yeah.
their fathers.
Yeah, and I think it's a topic that needs more attention. I think it's a topic within our community, single
Mhm.
parent homes, but it affects all cultures. We know that, right? But I love that you just started it just being intentional, just being genuine. It wasn't like sort of this thing you were trying to get attention and trying to
Right.
get clicks and all of that. It was like really just from your heart, like, hey, I've noticed this pattern. There's this gap that's not really being talked about. Can you break down this concept of the father wound? Because I think that is like such a symbolic, when you think about a wound, you think about something that, could heal. It may not heal that great,
Yeah.
it starts healing. And then, I just had all this symbolism that came to my mind when I saw that phrase. Can you talk about what that means for you and what that represents?
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. When you think about a wound or a cut, right? And it's the father wound because it never heals, right? It never heals completely,
Mhm.
Um, it can, with the right the right putting the right attention on it, and it's just unfortunate that a lot of times, and I talk to mainly adult fatherless daughters, not necessarily
Mhm.
children. But it's unfortunate that sometimes they don't even recognize the wounds that they have, right away. And then even some of the things that and some of the ways that the father wound plays out in their lives because it's what they've known is like, oh no, this is normal. And it's like, well, that's not really normal. You know what I mean? It's
Right.
like it's normal for you because you grew up with this wound,
Mhm.
and so all you've known is there's this cut here that I was,
Right.
not necessarily born with, but once I became old enough to recognize it always was there. And so you live with it and you don't necessarily know, that it's not supposed to be there, and there's a way to at least close the wound. It may not go away forever. It may also leave a scar. But there are some things that you can do in order to be able to heal it in your life. And so that father wound plays up, it shows up in different ways.
Mhm.
um, it can show up in the abandonment issues. It can show up in people pleasing. It can show up in staying in relationships or situations longer than you should because
Right.
of the abandonment issues. It can also come up in as self-sabotage, where you come into a relationship or you come into a situation that is really good, but because you have those abandonment issues, it's almost like, yeah, it's a little too good to be true, so
Mhm.
before you pull the rug up from under me, Imma pull the rug and Imma run. You know what I mean?
Right.
And so you have that self-sabotage that shows up as well. And so it shows up in a lot of ways. And I think the most unfortunate thing is that if we don't address it, it'll show up in you, but then it'll show up in your children. Right. And
Mm.
so one of the questions that I always ask, just to start the conversation, I always say, what generation of fatherlessness are you? Were
Okay.
you the first generation, or was your mother fatherless? Was her
Mhm.
mother fatherless? And how many generations does it go back? And so
Right.
sometimes even getting the daughters to even begin to really look at that and be able to notice the pattern, like, yeah, it is like 4 or 5 generations before me of
Mhm.
the same thing. And then my follow-up question is, okay, now that you recognize that, how many generations will come after you?
Right.
Or will you do something or start to put some things in place so that your daughter does not continue this same pattern? And not even
Mhm.
just the daughters, the fathers as well, because one of the things that I mean, not the sons as well, because one of the things that I came across in this work is a statistic that says most fatherless children will give birth to fatherless children. So whether that's
Mhm.
a son or a daughter, the son will produce children and then he won't show up in the lives of those children. And it's just that
Mhm.
cycle that continues to go. And so, yeah, so it shows up in different ways. And it just, if we're not intentional about, okay, I'm going to get the healing that I need, and not only am I going to get the healing that I need, but I'm going to start putting some parameters in place that deals with relationships and deals with, some godly and strong father figures in the life of my children, whether it's daughters or sons, so that
Mhm.
they have a healthy relationship, a healthy male relationship in their lives, a healthy male father figure, even if it's not their biological father. At
Yes.
least you still have someone who is pouring into you. So again, that wound may not completely heal, but at least you
Mhm.
begin to close it up. And once you start that, and then as they grow and develop, it closes more and more until it becomes no longer a generational wound that's being passed down.
Yes, and, I like the part that you said that it may not totally you still have that scar, but you know how to treat it, you know how to stop it from reopening, you know the signs and the symptoms that are manifesting that are saying, "Okay, wait, I need to step back and reflect on this." And in your work with dads and sons, and of course, the needs that those might be different than what young women are facing, or adult
Mhm.
women, going back and thinking about the generational patterns. What are some of the common struggles that you've seen fathers facing, and how does your program Man Up help them step into their role?
So the first thing that I recognize is the fathers and the sons kind of have that same struggle as the fatherless daughters, because
Uh-huh.
they have to deal with the fact that their fathers weren't in their lives, right? So when I originally started the program, it was just for minors pretty much, and but what I recognized was, even though it was set up for, like, you know, 12, I think I started at 12, like 12 to like 18, 19 years old, right? Like that
Uh-huh.
was high school years. The middle to high school years is where I wanted to focus, because I wanted to get them prepared before they got out into the world, and and that. But what I recognized was, if I stopped at 18, then I was able to look at these young fathers or young men who had became fathers at 18, 19, 20, 21, and realize that they couldn't be the fathers that they needed to be, because they didn't have the tools either,
Right.
and so I had to expand it, until 21, to at least start to getting these young dads, young men who are out of high school, who are now trying to navigate life and navigate fatherhood, on their own, and pour
Uh-huh.
into them as well as, okay, this is what this should look like from your view, the things that you need to invest in for yourself, but then the neat things that you also need to invest in to show up for your children. And so I just
Right.
had kind of had to and brought it out. And so I really just kind of looked back on the things that I got from my dad, like the
Uh-huh.
relationships and the teachings that I got from my dad, and some of the things that, from my own philosophy of being a young adult and growing into a man and father. And what are those things that I personally believe made a difference in my life, and still are making a difference in my life. And so those things, I just kind of took those things and packaged it up,
Uh-huh.
and again, that kind of was the foundation of the program. And started to offer it to schools, and we actually had a school that we were going to go with to have our first after school program, uh,
Okay.
right before COVID, and then COVID COVID came and shut everything down. It was like,
Yes.
"Oh, man, come on, we was almost there," but my goal is to revamp it and go virtual with it. And so in a way, COVID was a blessing, because it opens up the doors to all the information and all the ways to virtually do a lot of the things that we didn't even pay attention to before. Even the fact, like,
Uh-huh.
we on these podcasts, like my
Right.
podcast is a virtual podcast as well.
Uh-huh.
With the 200 and something people that I've had on my podcast, had it not been for COVID and opening up the door to be able to see what was possible
Right.
virtually, all those relationships I probably would have never had, because it's probably only a handful of them that's in my area where I could have actually met in person. But
Right.
everyone else I met virtually. I've met people from overseas I've had on my podcast, and so just open up those doors. So my goal is to revamp it all over
Uh-huh.
again, and make it more of a virtual program than a physical one. That
Yeah.
way, it still can reach who it needs to reach.
Yep, touch more people. I love that. And I want to talk about, and thank you for sharing all of
Mhm.
what you've been doing. I'd like to pivot a little bit and talk about, because I know a big premise of the mentorship that you do is rooted in moving past failure,
Mhm.
and you sharing your lived experiences and helping young parents, especially young dads or fathers who've been in it for a while. Because I think what happens, and I've seen this in work with clients before, where especially with parenting, they feel like they messed up, or the communication is broken down with the child, and so you know what, there's no going forward. How has what you've experienced in your personal life helped you be a mentor, and really helped you to share your experiences with those that you work with?
Yeah. So I was I think the biggest thing is I was a stepdad. I was a stepdad to four sons, right?
Okay.
And that changed a whole lot for me. because it's one thing to be a mentor to someone, you spend a couple hours with them and then, send them on their
Uh-huh.
way until next week or whenever the next meeting is. But
Right.
it's different when you have to show up every day. It's different when you have to show up every day for somebody. And so when I was always in their lives, right? So I'll give a quick rundown of this story. And so one of my oldest friends, and I have pictures of us in kindergarten. She's one of my oldest friends, and we grew up together, went to church together, all of those things when we were younger, became each other's first boyfriend and girlfriend when we were like 12 or 13 or whatever.
Mhm.
Um, got a little older, she went her way, got married. I went my way, got married. Both ended it in divorce over some time, and we ended up coming back together. And when we came back together from my marriage, I had my daughter, which is my only biological child. From her marriage, she had four sons, which was um, from her previous marriage. And so when we got together, now we had this blended family, right? So now we had this blended family of five kids. And now I have to show up for these four boys every
Mhm.
day, you know. And I remember we got into an argument one day, me and her, again, her being a fatherless daughter as well, didn't know from experience what that relationship is supposed to look like. And
Right.
so the way that I showed up to her wasn't um wasn't what her mind thought it should be, right? And I
Mhm.
remember her saying to me one day, you know, "You've never raised four boys," and I said, "You're
Mhm.
right, I haven't, but I know how somebody who does, my dad, and I'm one of
Yeah.
the four." You know what I mean?
Mhm.
So I know from firsthand experience what this relationship supposed to look like,
Right.
and so building that relationship with her to kind of uh, even show her how a father is supposed to show up, you know, even in her life and in my relationship with her and how I treated her was one way, but then also how I treated the boys and how I poured into them. And so one of the things I started with them was I told them in the door, I'm like, look, I know I'm not your dad, right?
Mhm.
And I'm not here to replace your dad. So that door for your father, it will always be open, but
Right.
I will stand in the gap until he shows up, And
Mhm.
so I said, I need you guys to know two things from here and on out. No matter what, just remember these two things. And remember, I love you, and I
Yeah.
always have your best interest at heart. And so if you can remember those two things, because I knew the day was going to come when, they get
Right.
teenagers and you're not my dad and all that
Yep.
stuff. I know all of that is coming.
Right.
But if we remember, let's start now and we're pouring into these two things. Remember, I love you and I have your best interest at heart. And then no matter what all the other things that comes down the line, even in the midst of those things, you will know that I love you and I have your best interest at heart. Even when you don't like me, even when you don't agree with me, even when, things don't look like how you may want it to look, you
Right.
will know that I love you and I have your best interest at heart. And I always laugh now. One of the things that I always say is my one son who gave me the hardest time, who gave me the hardest time as a young man is the one that says I love you the most now.
Yeah.
So, it's gratifying, is amazing to watch them now. All of them are in their 20s or a little
Mhm.
I think all of them is in their 20s. The oldest one, I think, is like 27 now.
Okay.
All of them are young men. Two of them have daughters. And so again, that fatherless daughter thing is
Mhm.
heavy now. Like, all right, you got to show up. You know what
Yeah.
I mean? And
Yep.
so, yeah, it's amazing to watch them even grow up. But yeah, that definitely was the thing that kinda made me like, "Alright, now you gotta show up." And
Yeah.
that relationship then because I really became a mentor afterwards, right? So, as far
Okay.
as with boys, so once they got a little older, it was like, "Alright, let me find, another
Mhm.
space, to be active in this space." And then I became, I actually joined another, organization called Champs here in Chicago. Champs Male Mentoring became a mentor there to be able to
Okay.
deal, to add on to the other young men. And I don't
That's
even know if that answered your question. I just
No, no, thank you for sharing that because, I hadn't even planned or even known to get into the whole concept of, blended families. And so
Right,
that is just so right on target because there are so many blended families. We know families look different and trying to navigate that or co-parenting. So that's going to hit for someone listening. So I'm so
right.
glad that you shared that story because that's another important conversation of you stepping in and just saying, "Hey, look, I'm not trying to replace anyone, but I have unconditional love for you. I'm here to support you." And that relationship has continued to grow. And so
Yeah.
thank you for
Yeah,
sharing
and
that.
that's
That
a
was a
and that's
beautiful story.
I'll just say this. I'll say this as well because I remember having a conversation on one of my podcasts with one of my guests because like I said when I came into their lives when we got married we had an open door policy for their father,
Mhm.
because he lived around. He was like probably like 30, 40 minutes away from us. So he wasn't
Okay.
far away. He was around.
Right.
He'd show up occasionally. And on the days that he would show up, like he would come to the house, we'll all sit down and hang out or whatever. But then I will always remove myself so that they can have that time with their father. And I
Mhm.
remember having a conversation, with the young man, and he was like, how did that make you feel? Because their father show up and then it's like all about him and whatever, like did
Right.
that make you feel some type of way even though you were the one that was there and all of that.
Mhm.
I said no, because I grew up with my father, so I
Right.
know what that relationship is supposed to be. I'm only
Mhm.
here because things didn't necessarily work out with him and the mom, but as far as
Mhm.
being a father, that's his job. They're
Right.
supposed to admire him. They're supposed to love him. They're supposed to look up to him. That's why I
Mhm.
made it known I'm not here to take his place because that is a place where they're supposed to have for him. So
Right.
no, I didn't feel any type of way. I actually was happy when he came around.
Yeah.
But I knew what that relationship was supposed to be, and I knew how that made them feel as young men
Yes.
when their father actually did come around and they actually spent time for him with him. So I actually was happy when he came
Yeah.
around. Not for me. I was happy for them, like because
Right.
that was an experience that they didn't get all the time. And I
Yeah.
tried to be the best stepdad that I could, the best.
Mhm.
I don't necessarily like to say stepdad, but that definitely the best father figure that I could. But the
Mhm.
truth of the matter will always be, I'm not their biological father, and there
Right.
is a space that only he can fill, and so but I didn't feel any type of way. I was always happy when he came around because 'cause I'm like,
Yeah.
"Alright, now they
It
get
wasn't
to
a
have that relationship."
competition. Yeah, it wasn't a
Yeah.
competition for you. It was and I can imagine in many circumstances that helped even your relationship with them because there wasn't this animosity that can happen sometimes when, biological parent isn't around and there is another, figure in the home. It was like they're getting, even more support, and
Mhm.
so thank you for sharing that. I know we didn't plan on going that direction, but I am glad that we went that direction. So again, it's all organic. So I love it, and you just sharing, your experiences. I have one last question for you before I'm going to give you an opportunity to shine and talk about all the the things you're doing and where people can find you. But you talk a lot about the importance of healing ourselves, and then that in turn heals our families, and then our families heal our communities. Can you talk about the impact that having strong families has on communities?
I think so I'll start here, right? Because
Mhm.
I'm the community person,
Yes.
but I'm the community person because of family, right?
Mhm.
So my grandmother was the baby of 12 siblings, and then
Wow.
she had 10 kids. My mom was one of the 10, and then my mom had 9. Right? And so just in those 3 generations, there's
That's
a
a lot.
lot of family. You know what I mean? There's a lot of family. And so just growing up with that family structure, and then we were a church family as well. So you have
Mhm.
your immediate family, your biological blood family, and then we have our church family, which is
Okay.
very large as well. And so just the concept of family and community has always been important to me. Right. And
Mhm.
then now as an adult, kind of doing my own thing. I'm not around my family as much because we all have families, so we all
Right.
got our own things going on. And so community started to play a big role in my life. And so I started thinking about the things I enjoy, the things that I care about, and either joining a community around that or building a community around that. Right. And
Uh-huh.
so all of those things play a part in our community as a whole, as a living organism of people that we have, because there are a lot of missing pieces, and the community that you have will help to fill in those pieces, right? And so
Uh-huh.
even me saying, from a young age, realizing the uh, missing parts that was missing with some of the young men that I was around, for my dad, I mean, for their dads not being around. One of the things that has I had to address, or I had to come to terms with, that even though my dad wasn't a mentor, you know what I
Uh-huh.
mean? Like, he didn't necessarily take out time with other people's kids or whatever.
Right.
But the reason why my friend was able to joke so much about my dad, because he was paying attention, because he
Right.
was there. Just
Uh-huh.
his presence made a difference in this young man's life, where he was able to notice all these things, you know.
Right.
And so even I think about that, when you think about the community and the healing that we need as a community, when we show up for each other, or just show up in our natural best self, it
Uh-huh.
fills in so many gaps that we have in the community. If someone's hungry, I grew up in the church where we did the food, food, or we
Right.
went to the nursing homes and the centers, and had
Uh-huh.
service there, and for those, those who couldn't get to church, and all of that. So the
Right.
community, the church, the families, when we begin to heal ourselves and show up for ourselves, and then it opens up the doors for us to be able to show up for other people and show up for other spaces in the community, to again fill in those gaps for all of us to begin to heal together. And I think one
Uh-huh.
of the worst things that has happened to the Black community, and I'll say this, is the idea of independence, right?
Yeah.
We got so far away from each other with the
Uh-huh.
mindset of, I'm independent and I'm going to do this and I want this for me, and
Right.
all of that, that we kind of lost some of our community in the midst of
Uh-huh.
that. We lost a lot of our family structures, even in the church and other organizations that
Yeah.
we were such a heavy a part of, that did
Uh-huh.
so much for us as a unit. When the idea of individualism came in, and everybody kind of doing for self, it put a
Right.
lot of wedges in our community. And so we got to get back to that. Yes, do for self. And I'll say this, and then I'll stop talking because I'll be
Oh,
going
no,
forever.
please.
But
No.
I, um, I
Continue.
do I do I do career days and things like that, to go to the schools and talk to the
Yeah.
students. And one of the things that I have began to tell the students whenever I go there is, even when you're thinking about what it is you want to be, what it is you want to do, what do you want to achieve in your life, I want you also to keep in the front or in the back of your mind, with those decisions, how can whatever I decide to do, how can that be a blessing to someone else?
Mm.
Right? That should always be a part of you, that is always thinking of how you can be a blessing to someone else, because that is
Yeah.
how you're going to find, number one, true fulfillment within yourself, because
Mhm.
you can only do so much for you. And
Right.
I remember my mentor, one of my mentors, Dr. Eric Thomas, giving this telling his testimony. It wasn't even a story; it was his testimony, because he's well off. He's
Uh-huh.
made some money, right? And so he just had this conversation with God, and God was like, I need you to be a billionaire, right? And he was like,
Uh-huh.
I don't need to be a billionaire. I'm good. Like, I got a
Right.
couple, I got a couple M's behind my name. My family's good. The church is good, and
Right.
everybody's good. Like, I don't need to be a billionaire. And he said, God said, oh, you thought it was about you. Like,
Uh-huh.
it's not about you. I don't
It's
need you to
never
do.
about
Yeah, if I wanted to make sure you is okay, then we're good. But there's so much more I want you to do for others. that you're
Mhm.
going to have to be a billionaire to have the resources in order to do it. And so I
Right.
think that that's something that we all need to, think of. But I would definitely try to pour it into the young kids when I go talk to them. Like, I always have the thought process of how can I help someone else?
Right.
Because once you get to a certain level, and that's why, you have all the famous
Mhm.
people that go into depression and all that stuff. They got all the money, you know what
Right.
I mean, and all that stuff, but that doesn't bring you fulfillment. That doesn't heal your heart.
Mhm.
It only allows you to mask it, for so
Yeah.
long, and then
Yep.
you'll find yourself in a place that you might not want to be. But the true fulfillment comes when you can be a blessing to someone else. And when you can
Yes.
use your resources to say, okay, I helped this person, I was able to bless this person, and
Mhm.
not necessarily, I mean, I know it plays a part with the cameras and recording
Right.
and all of that, but sometimes those things that you do behind the scenes that nobody knows about,
Right.
but it gives you that fulfillment in your life and in your heart, and I think those are the things that's important. And when we get back to those things,
Right.
that's gonna be a lot of healing, and that'll help to bring our communities back together.
And be stronger, yeah, and because it's genuine, it's authentic, it's coming from a place of service, and you get the accolades come along with it naturally, but that's not why you're doing it,
Right.
and thank you so much for sharing. I know we could talk about this for hours, and I definitely I'm in the Chicago area, so we need to link up and do some
Okay.
stuff, here locally. And
Definitely.
I'm not a hometown native though, so I'm just coming in just a few years. So,
Okay.
you'll have to forgive me if I don't have all the slang and everything down.
Right, yeah,
Um, but where can folks find you? I know you talked about your podcast, and we'll make sure to have all the information down in the podcast description. But where can folks find you, reach out to you, follow you, all that great stuff?
Yes, you guys can definitely find me on YouTube. If you look up Ernest James on YouTube, I have a lot of stuff on there. But you
Okay.
can find me on YouTube on under the Deal to Heal podcasting network,
Okay.
where you will find my Deal to Heal with E. James podcast. And also, I didn't even get into this one. I
Yeah.
started a podcast called I was gonna say Friends of Fathers Daughters, that's not it. A podcast called, Girl Dad Discussions. So, I
Okay.
started a podcast called Girl Dad Discussions in order to combat the narrative of the absent father and the fatherless daughter. And so on
Right.
that podcast, I have, conversations with other girl dads like myself, and even sometimes the daughters come on and talk about their relationship, that father and daughter relationship,
Okay.
in order to again combat that narrative of the absent father, because there
Right.
are fathers that are very active in the
Yes.
lives of our daughters. And
Mhm.
with that, June 14th, and this probably gonna come out after the fact, but I'll mention
Okay.
it
That's
anyway.
okay.
June 14th, the Sunday before Father's Day, we're doing our second annual daddy daughter dance for dads and daughters of all ages. So it's not
Okay.
just for the dads with the younger daughters. Like, no, we had adult daughters, some adult daughters that brought their dads as their
Mhm.
guests to the daddy daughter dance last year. And so that was the first one, and so we're doing the second one this year. Um, and you can find more information about that on Eventbrite, which I definitely want you
Okay.
guys to look us up on Eventbrite. The organization is dealhealfulfill.org.
Okay.
And you can find it there, and there you will not only find the daddy daughter dance, but that's where we'll be doing our workshops. So we do workshops
Mhm.
around grief, suicidal ideation, all of those things. So you'll find us there. Um, where else can you find me? If you look up Ernest James on Facebook, you'll find me there. On Instagram,
Okay.
Ernest James Speaker, you'll find me there. And our website, my speaking website, ernestjamesspeakslife.com. You can
Okay.
reach out to me there to find out how you can have me to come out to facilitate a workshop or speak for your school or organization.
Okay.
And dealhealfulfill.org. Our that website is our main website. It will be getting a makeover soon because it is
Okay.
outdated, but
Yeah.
you still can go there and find out some things. And so, even and let me say this, as a person who loves to help people, my mission is to help people to deal, heal, and fulfill, to deal with your
Yes.
problems, to heal from the pain, and to fulfill your purpose. And so that's where the deal to heal, deal, heal, fulfill, all of that comes from, because
Yes.
that is my mission, to help people to heal. And that's part of my story. I had to do some healing,
Yeah.
dealt with some grief after the loss of my mom and all of
Mhm.
that, dealt with some suicidal ideations. And so I'm very open about all of that, because I want to
Mhm.
open the doors for others to be able to share what they're dealing with. Because I know I'm not the only one. I'm not the first
Right.
one, and I'm unfortunately not going to be the last
Glad.
one. But I can use my experience and how God has helped me to heal, to be able to help others to heal as well.
Well, thank you so much for having a platform, for sharing your experiences, for being vulnerable, but also helping rebuild the
Mhm.
community, helping tap into people who need the support, whether that's daughters, sons, mothers, fathers. So I appreciate you. I can't wait to stay in touch
Yeah.
and link up and do hopefully some good work together. So everyone, please check out Ernest. He's everywhere. So we're going to have all the stuff down, but you can find him everywhere. So you have no excuse. I also want to give a shout out to my dad because I can call him at any moment and
Mhm.
talk to him. And if I need anything, he's always there. So thank you for changing the narrative and thank you for helping support those who need it. And love to have you back soon. And
Nice to meet
audience, we'll be back in a couple of weeks with a new episode of the Lived Experiences podcast.